So, Mike, you wrote this up at the TMCA. Tell us what's going on with Lenz these days.
Right. So this, of course, is the copyright case that keeps on giving. Lenz v. Universal, as I think probably all of our listeners know, centers around the posting of a video on YouTube involving a 28-second clip of Prince's "Let's Go Crazy" playing in the background, and the little baby was dancing around. Ultimately, Universal told YouTube to take it down under the DMCA takedown notice provisions. Ultimately, Stephanie Lenz thought that there was not a sufficient basis under the Copyright Act. And what she did is ultimately filed a lawsuit under Section 512F of the DMCA that said that Universal, or alleged that Universal didn't have a good faith belief that the video was infringing. Ninth Circuit ultimately last fall, as we've discussed before, held the first court to hold so in the court that, or in the country rather. Ninth Circuit held that in order to have a subjective good faith belief, you need to look at the alleged infringement and determine if there is a fair use associated with that. And so that's what the Ninth Circuit held. So the appeal Lenz is now asking the U.S. Supreme Court to weigh in, even though I think by and large, Lenz prevailed before the Ninth Circuit. Ultimately, there was a question of fact as to whether there was a subjective good faith belief, and the case was sent back down for trial. So what Lenz is saying here in its filing to the Supreme Court is, look, the Ninth Circuit got it wrong, because under the DMCA, if it truly is a subjective good faith belief as opposed to an objective good faith belief, then you could claim as the copyright owner, look, I had a subjective good faith belief, according to Lenz, no matter how bizarre that belief is, so long as you subjectively held it, then you are immune from liability under the DMCA. And one of the examples that Lenz's lawyers used is you could potentially consult as the copyright owner with a fortune teller. And so long as that fortune teller told you that this was an infringement and you subjectively believed that was the case, then you're immune from liability under the DMCA. So what Lenz is arguing for here and asking the U.S. Supreme Court to step in, Lenz is saying, court, this should be an objective standard. It shouldn't be subjective. It needs to be objectively reasonable. And so that's really what they're asking the court to decide. They're saying this is a case of nationwide implications, and that it's very important because you've got a platform like YouTube where lots and lots of content resides, and we need to kind of clarify the rules of the road here under the DMCA. So that's essentially what Lenz is asking the Supreme Court to do.
Right. Do you agree with their position in making that request, that the Ninth Circuit decision is as open-ended as they say it is? Do you agree with the fortune teller argument?
Well, I think, let me say this. I think Lenz's lawyers they're great advocates, and their writing is absolute first rate. I do think, though, and Emory may disagree with me, I think that there's maybe a little bit of they've overplayed it a little bit here, because one, this is the very first court in the country that's come out with this decision as to the subjective good faith belief, and that you've got to assess fair use. So we don't know how trial courts are going to interpret it. I mean, it's possible, as I said in our blog post, that somebody will come forward, a copyright owner will say, look, I consulted with the selfie-taking monkey Naruto, and Naruto informed me that that this was an infringement, and therefore, I subjectively believe that was the case. I'm obviously exaggerating, but
you're using a bad example, because if anyone's an expert on fair use, it would be Naruto, right?
That's true. That's true. So very, very bad example.
Lawyers.
Yes.
But I think it remains to be seen whether this case is problematic. The Ninth Circuit decision is problematic. I think to the extent that we get all sorts of bizarre claims by copyright owners that they had a subjective good faith belief, when in fact you're looking at it and it would be unreasonable to form such a subjective good faith belief, I think it remains to be seen whether this is really poses a doomsday scenario as posited by Lenz. I think my subjective good faith prediction is that the U.S. Supreme Court is not going to accept this case. There's no circuit split. I think it's a very important issue. It certainly is one that will call for careful consideration by the lower courts, but I'm just not sure that it's ready for prime time at the U.S. Supreme Court.
Right. Emory, any thoughts on Lenz going to the Supreme Court?
No, I mean, I'd love to see more strength given to 512F. So, I'm not really. I think I'm on board with Mike. I don't know if I have given enough thought cycles to figuring out whether or not I buy the subjective good faith argument or not, or whether actually 512F would be strengthened more with an objective or subjective standard. So, yeah, I'm just happy to get Mike's take on it.
Yeah,
right.
And to be clear, I mean, the Ninth Circuit, it's very clear that the Ninth Circuit said it is a subjective good faith belief. So you've got to establish that. The parade of horribles that Lenz is concerned with is we're going to come up with a bunch of crackpot, quote unquote, subjective good faith reasons as to why something was infringement, and that remains to be seen. We may not.
Could it be the case, and maybe this would be a reason for the Supreme Court to pass on it, that the good faith qualifier does all that we need it to do? That basically, although the word subjective is in there, you have to have arrived at that belief without consulting a fortune teller, because that wouldn't be a good faith conclusion.
I think that's probably right, Denise. That look, even though it's subjective, and you've got to have formed a subjective good faith belief, I think ultimately where courts are going to go with this is it's still got to be objectively reasonable. Now that may seem inconsistent with the court's holding, but I kind of look at it. We were talking about Fourth Amendment earlier in the show. There's both a subjective and objective component with respect to the Fourth Amendment, and I think we might see something similar here with lower court interpretations. They're going to say, look, you've got to have the subjective good faith belief, but it's got to be something that's objectively reasonable. And if you ultimately meet both prongs, then you're going to be okay. I'm obviously guessing here as to whether there's going to be this objective criteria that's infused into it. But I think at some level, there's going to be some degree of objectivity that needs to be brought to bear.